Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Dead Rabbit Radio Classics, where we listen to a past episode with a new intro. Actually, in this case, we're going to do a new outro. I'm going to do a little intro here. You can listen to the episode, and then if you want the behind-the-scenes stuff, it's at the ending. You can fast forward to the ending if you've already heard the episode, but I realized I was originally trying to record it all as an intro, and I was giving a bunch of stuff away. So for people who haven't listened to the episode yet, it's a really good episode. It was suggested by my Patreon supporters, Cole and Danielle, so thank you very much. If you've already heard the episode, you've heard it multiple times, jump to the ending. If you haven't, I recommend listening to the episode. It's a great episode. We'll discuss it at the end, because I was giving too much stuff away. Are there Nazis on another planet? And then we take a look at the unique take of the Mormon Church and its view on Bigfoot today on Dead Rabbit Radio. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Dead Rabbit Radio. I'm your host, Jason Carpenter. I'm having a great day. I hope you're having a great day too. We got some weird stuff going on today. Nothing to actually be considered its own story, but I did want to get this out here. First off, YouTube is down. I imagine that YouTube will be up by tomorrow, if not before then. But of course, people are freaking out, and they're like, was something uploaded to YouTube and they had to shut down the entire site to prevent the masses from seeing it? Unlikely. Possible, but unlikely. It most likely is some sort of technical issue, but we're going to have an open mind about it. We're going to keep looking at it. You know, and also, I want to touch back on this too. We never heard more about the Sunspot Observatory and the janitor who was downloading child porn. That was it. Like, that's public information. When you arrest somebody for that, unless they're cooperating with the police to wrap up like a ring of other predators, that should be public information. We haven't heard anything more about that. So I'm gonna do some more research on that. I just was looking at something today about that, and I was like, okay, this is getting fishy. Like, at the time I go, well, maybe it's a legit thing, but we still have no more information on this janitor, at least that I've seen. So we're gonna look into that. I did want to start the story off with this. Now, you know that I don't like to do political stuff unless it becomes a conspiracy thing. And I actually have a conspiracy theory about what's going on right now, and I don't have much proof. Just have a hunch. There is, about a couple days ago, at least we heard about it a couple days ago, 3,000 immigrants left Honduras and began making its way up through Central America, and their goal is to either stop in Mexico or come into the United States. And there's already the photos of, like, hundreds of people, like, you know, waving flags and stuff like that. And they tried to block him at the Honduras border, but they just let him through. They're like, we can't do this. This is about 3 weeks before the U.S. election. I think this is a CIA operation. I think that the images that are... This is going to play out for about a week or two. As they're moving, they're going to keep covering this. And I think that it is a political move. What are the chances that 3,000 people gather together 3 weeks before the election? I think that the point of the march is that it creates a face where basically President Trump can say, if you vote for the Democrats, this is going to be a continuous thing. I'm the guy who's strong on immigration, and I need a Congress to support my immigration goals. I have absolutely no proof of that, but we're going to see this group march for, and I'm sure that there are Democratic operatives who are like, this is the worst timing possible, because you're putting a face and you're putting sounds and all these huge images of this big crowd, and there's going to be people on the Democrats say, no, like, this is a humanitarian crisis, we have to let them in, and independents are just, they've spent the last 2 years in the middle going, both of these groups are nutty. But I'm going to have to pick somebody soon. So after all of the ups and downs of President Trump's administration and all the ups and downs of the resist movement, within 3 weeks, those independents are going to have to make a decision. And this puts a very, very vivid picture. So I think it's a political operation. So we'll see. I think it's again, though, I have no proof of that whatsoever. Just a hunch. The timing was really weird. Really weird. So I spent the last half hour reading about this whole YouTube thing, so I'm a little discombobulated. And when I sat down to start recording this episode, I said, you know what, I'm going to give one more look at my notes regarding the Vril Society and the Nazi plan to build these UFOs. And I was like, okay, I know the approach I'm taking with this story. And I sat down, I looked at my notes a little bit more to kind of like get my head wrapped around it. And I was like, I don't know anymore. I don't know where I'm at anymore on this story. So the Vril Society. The Vril Society is something that you've probably heard a lot of if you like are consuming mass media. Vril Society is always that like Nazis on the moon type of thing, like with Iron Sky. I believe they're the villains in a couple Wolfenstein games. Them along with the Thule Society. So the Thule Society was a group of occultists who believed that the Aryan race was supreme. So obviously they were quite popular among the higher echelon of the Nazi regime. The Vril Society was a bit different. It was mostly headed by women, and they believed there was this substance called Vril. It was basically like an unlimited energy supply that you could find, and you could use it to power your weapons. Vril might actually have even been in... No, they used the Cosmic Cube in Captain America. But anyway, so it's this fantastical thing that I had always heard about as a kid, researching like weird stuff. I heard about the Vril Society and the Thule Society and the Nazi UFOs and all of that stuff. And so I go, I'm going to take a look at this. I think that might be a good subject for the podcast. So here's the gist of it. You have the Vril Society, and you had its leader, Maria Orsic. And she was this famous medium. In 1919, she claimed to have received a blueprint into her brain, and it told her the technical data for building a flying saucer. So in 1919, she's like, and like now she knows how to build a flying saucer. And it talks about like she gets these visions of Vril, which it was already kind of known of before that, but this was kind of her big thing. So she knows that they need Vril to power it, and she knows where they should go in case, things don't work out well, which is a little bit of foresight on her part, to Aldebaran. Not Alderaan from Star Wars, but there's a real star system called Aldebaran, with a B, 68 light years away. So anyways, she became very popular among the Thule Society and high-ranking Nazis. Hitler actually, I didn't know this, Hitler kind of frowned upon occult practices altogether. He was just kind of like, whatever, like, I'm glad he talks like a valley girl, but, he just didn't really care for much about religion in general. He saw it as like an unnecessary distraction for his leadership, but they were doing it, so he's like, whatever, guys, like, whatever, like, I got other stuff to do. So he goes in the other room, and I imagine they're like playing with the Ouija board in their full-on Nazi regalia. So Maria meets with Rudolf Hess, who's a high-ranking in the political party of the Nazis. And he's like, whoa, you can, like, this Vril stuff, we need to attain this. Like, look at all these blueprints that you have. This is great technology. The war, obviously, spoiler alert, doesn't work out well for the Nazis. And this Maria Orsic girl and the other followers of the Vril Society disappeared. In 1945, they're just gone. All trace of them are gone. Nobody could ever really figure out where they went. And the theory put forth was that they were able to get the Vril, and they were able to build the spacecraft that took them, and possibly others, to Aldebaran. So I had heard that story before. That's actually very, like, popular, like, deep Nazi esotericism. How do you say that? I need to stop saying words that I don't understand. I mean, I understand. I have to stop saying words I can't pronounce. That was, like, deep Nazi supernatural lore. And like I said, it's in a lot of popular culture. I had heard about the Vril Society, Thule Society, growing up. Because it's an intriguing image of this high science fiction weaponry being crafted in laboratories and, being used in war. And maybe like you had small units of like U.S. commandos like shooting Nazis and like taking possession of this. They're like, what is this? It's some sort of hoverboard or something. I don't know. But anyways, so like it's a very intriguing thing. 100% totally fake. There is no proof whatsoever that Maria Orsic ever existed. And when I was researching this, I was going into it looking for these groups that existed, never existed. Absolutely never existed. I'm like, are you kidding me? It was so disappointing. Not saying that I want the Nazis to have space-age weapons, but it was something that I didn't think they actually succeeded in getting space-age weapons, but I thought there was a group of people who were trying to they don't exist. There was no Vril Society whatsoever. Maria Orsic, they say her dad was born here and her mom was born here. We don't know their names. There's no photos of her. Well, let me rephrase that. There's one photo of a girl, and then there's drawings of a totally different girl. And depending on what website you go to, it's a different drawing or a different photo. Doesn't exist. That's why she disappeared after the war. Totally made up. And you're like, Jason, that, maybe the documentation, maybe. No, because she was actually the narrator of a fictional novel. She was the narrator of a book called, so after the fact, after she had supposedly lived and died or lived and floated away to space, in 1960, a book came out called Morning of the Magicians. It's a collection of short stories, conspiracy theories, basically. And it has giants once ruled the earth. We've heard that one before. The Nazca lines are like the giants making them, supposedly. It also includes speculations about German occultism and supernatural phenomenon. So it's completely made up, and that's where the Vril Society comes from. Vril, you go, what about the energy story? That also came from a novel. That novel was published in 1871, and it was called Vril, The Power of the Coming Race. It was a book about people living in the hollow earth and how great they were and how sucky humans were. Again, you can see the allure of the Nazi regime to that. These giant, great leaders of humanity were better than the subhumans above Earth, and everything they had was powered by Vril. So the Vril was a completely made-up thing in a book. The Vril Society was a completely made-up thing. Maria Orsic, completely made up. There was no such things as any of those. And it was very, very disappointing for me to discover that. Now, the Thule Society is real, but all they were was an occult group that believed in racial superiority. They may have been like, light 8 candles. Hey, Rudolph Hess, go say Bloody Mary. No, I'm not doing that. No, you got to do it. It's part of the ritual. There might have been like that level of occult stuff. They weren't summoning demons. They weren't making UFOs appear. They weren't doing anything cool. They were just being like anti-cosmic Satanists in 1943. So I was disappointed. We know Vril doesn't exist. We know she doesn't exist. We know the Vril Society doesn't exist. And then you go, okay, Jason, but you said you changed your mind on this story. Did you believe it and now you don't? No, this is what was interesting as I was going through my notes. And I still believe that Maria Orsic doesn't exist and that the Vril Society never existed. And that Vril is fictional. So it strikes, 3 strikes. In 1947... Willy Ley, he was a German rocket engineer who fled Germany in 1937. Again, he had good foresight. In 1947, he published an article called Pseudoscience in Nazi Land. And he was talking about all the weird stuff that Germans believe. He's like, dude, these guys are nuts. So this is only 2 years after the end of the war. He did say, he goes, there's a bunch of weird groups over there. And he goes, there's a group that all they do is look for Vril, which is totally made up. It doesn't exist. He called them the Wahrheitsgesellschaft, or the Society for Truth. And he says it was just a group of people among all the other weirdo cults. So he was just talking about all these weird beliefs at the time. He says the Society for Truth did go around looking for Vril. So there were groups of people, there was a group of people who believed a fictional novel talking about Vril was real, and I think that was the end of it. He didn't name anybody in particular. The group name's completely different. I think from that, the authors who wrote Morning of the Magicians, which is all like the little tales and stuff like that, most likely read his article and elaborated on it, and that's fine. I just think it's ridiculous that now it's almost become common knowledge that, oh, the Nazis had this, were at least working on this high technology, and some people believe they actually achieved it. And they didn't, which, I mean, is good. So yeah, doesn't exist. You let me down, Wolfenstein. The Vril Society, Nazis flying to Aldebaran, living on the moon, doesn't exist. People think the Nazis went to Antarctica and we had like this huge war with them and they had this high technology there. No. History is interesting enough. History really is interesting enough. We don't need to add. Although that would be cool. Let's just stick to the facts. Because then I discover it and I get disappointed. You don't want to disappoint me. I'm sad. Okay. So we're moving on to our next story. This story was something that I never ever considered. I didn't think it was a real thing. Platinum P on YouTube commented on, I believe it was on my Bigfoot episode yesterday, said, why don't you cover Mormon Bigfoot? And I responded, because I'd never heard of it before, and I will look into it. So I spent this morning looking into, and assuming I'm going to find nothing. No offense, Platinum P. I figured that it was a real thing that you had heard about, but I figured it would be totally obscure. There are a ton of resources on Mormon Bigfoot. Now, this is what's interesting. It's not that Bigfoot himself is Mormon. It's the Mormons' theory on Bigfoot. So we're going to have to go back in time to start this story off. We're going to go back to late 1800s. David W. Patton. So David W. Patton is Mormon, or was Mormon, and he was one of the, original leaders of the Mormon Church. Now, not like a founding member, but he knew Joseph Smith. This is his story of what happened to him one day in Tennessee. I couldn't find a date for this, but as I was riding along the road on my mule, I should put, Western music in this part. As I was riding along the road on my mule, I suddenly noticed a very strange personage walking beside me. His head was about even with my shoulders as I sat in my saddle. He wore no clothing but was covered with hair. His skin was very dark. I asked him where he dwelt, and he replied that he had no home, that he was a wanderer in the earth and traveled to and fro. He said he was a very miserable creature, that he had earnestly sought death during his sojourn upon the earth, that he could not die, and his mission was to destroy the souls of men. About this time he expressed himself thus: I rebuked him in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ and by virtue of the holy priesthood, and commanded him to go hence, and he immediately departed from my sight. So, that story, the reason why we know about that story was apparently he told that story to his buddy, Lycurgus Wilson. Lycurgus Wilson wrote a letter to another guy named Abraham Smoot. Abraham Smoot was writing a biography about David W. Patton in 1900. So the first time that this story came to light was in 1900. Now, Bigfoot sightings obviously had been around for a long time with the Native Americans. But even among Westerners, Bigfoot sightings were very, very, 1800s, early 1800s. So it would make sense that he would, every area had a different name for him. Like in The Walking Dead, some people call them walkers and other areas call them biters and stuff like that, because they wouldn't have national communication lines. You should watch The Walking Dead, by the way. It's really good. Anyways, so this story, again, this is coming from a established member of the Mormon Church, one of the original guys. I'm using that term wrong, but he was highly, and he died a martyr for the Mormon cause. He was killed trying to rescue Mormons who had been arrested, and they shot him. They had this charge, and he died, and Joseph Smith was like, this dude was dope, and we should always remember him. So it's this guy was OG Mormon. So he tells this story that he supposedly told this one guy, and then the guy wrote it. People were like, how do we take this? Now, the first thing that they do is they go, in the Mormon community, they go, okay, we really trust this guy. We trust this whole chain of people. He might have met Bigfoot. And Bigfoot may have been Cain. So the story of Cain and Abel, it's Bible class, guys. It's Bible class time. Cain and Abel were the sons of Adam and Eve. And Abel was like a really good worker, and Cain was like a total dick, never did anything. And he was really jealous of his brother. So one day he picks a rock up and just bashes his brains in, kills him. It's not true, but some people consider it the first murder. Obviously, there had been murders before that. We'll get into that in a second. But so he just bashes his brother's brain out, and God shows up. Like, voice in the sky, burning bush, however. He just is there. And he says, "What have you done, dude? You're covered in your brother's blood. Your brother cries out from me from the ground," which is creepy, actually. So do, like, corpses go, "Help, God, get me out of here." So then God says, "Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth up to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth." Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is more than I can bear. Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." And then God says, "Not so. Anyone who kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over." Then the Lord put a mark on Cain so that no one who found him would kill him. So Cain went out of the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. There's been a lot of, this particular passage has been, the whole Bible's been analyzed over and over again. The first question is, if Adam and Eve had Cain and Abel, but how does Cain go to a city? Like, he's headed out to Nod, and he ends up having a wife and having kids and stuff like that. And that's, again, always the pushback. The Bible is not a scientific textbook. It is not a genealogical tree of the entire planet. It is a religious history and a religious text of a particular people. So don't go to it looking for scientific questions. There were a ton of other people in the area, obviously, if Cain is able to leave and have a family and it not be his sister. That little rant aside, that's where they're getting this idea that he has to wander the earth, nobody can kill him, and the mark is the hairiness. And since he can't till the land, since the land is dead to him, how else would you feed yourself? You would just have to walk through the forest and eat squirrels and stuff, eat berries. You could never be in any sort of industrialized society, especially back then, an agrarian society, because you'd be cursed to not have anything grow. 2, nowadays, people would be like, "Dude, you're 7 feet tall and you're hairy. Where are you supposed to work? McDonald's? I can't have you behind the counter." He might be able to work in a call center, depending on how he smells. David W. Patton had that encounter with whatever it was. Maybe he made it up, but let's assume that this actually happened. And like anything, when something pops up that's kind of weird, there's generally the religion mainstream will take it one of 2 ways. They'll either go, "That's a quaint story, but let's not get out of hand with that." And other people will say, "This guy is so high up in the church and he was well respected, we should give it some veracity." And the story was just kind of there for a while. It was something people would talk about as kind of a weird part of Mormon lore. Like, did David W. Patton really see Bigfoot? He's on a horse and the guy's as tall as he is and he's covered in hair. So years later, in 1969, the president of the church at that time was President Kimball. He wrote a book called The Miracle of Forgiveness. And he used that story in that book. So more than 100 years later, about 69 years later, actually. So 69 years later, he used that story and he's the president. So the president of the Mormon Church is basically the Mormon Pope. Like, they actually receive visions from God. And they can change certain laws. They can say, "You know what, we're going to allow this. We're going to allow you to drink caffeine now. I just got a message from God," and he says we can drink caffeine. Just got a message from God. We can start dancing. So they're the ultimate prophet. They are a Latter-day Saint, in a way. I think they're all considered Latter-day Saints, but the prophet, he's in charge. So him writing a book and using this story in it led a ton of renewed interest in it and credibility behind it. And when he uses that quote, he's basically saying this actually happened. So the common belief, unspoken, is in the Mormon Church that Bigfoot is actually Cain. Almost and that would explain why you can't catch him, you can't kill him. He's doomed to wander the planet. So if we caught him, if we proved that it was him, then we just put him in a cage. His punishment is just to walk the earth until the end of time. So it would explain why we can't catch him. Now, it doesn't explain why there are sometimes sightings of multiple Bigfoot, Big Fi, unless he had brought his family with him, or he continues to have kids, but would they live forever? So next time you see a Mormon, you should ask them. Don't be rude, but just ask them if they've heard this story. And I can almost guarantee it's going to be 50-50. Some of them are going to be like, yeah, it's a fairy tale that, we tell our kids, but I personally don't believe it. And they're most likely being honest. And then other ones will be like, oh yeah, I've heard that before. I don't know whether or not I believe it, but I have heard that story before. Every religion has wacky stories in it. When I was reading about this, there's debate that whether or not Bigfoot could exist at all based on Bible. I was going down the rabbit hole, or the Bigfoot hole on this one. Could Bigfoot exist at all in biblical tradition? And one side says no. The flood would have wiped down Bigfoot. Like if he existed, and if Cain was Bigfoot, that was one of the pushbacks. If Cain really was Bigfoot, the flood would have destroyed him. The flood would have killed Cain/Bigfoot. That would have been the end of it. Other people think that it could be the leftover of the Nephilim, but since the point of the flood was to wipe them out, that's unlikely. Some people think this is post-flood. Some people think it's a dude. This is so funny. The Bible, again, just has the weirdest stories in it. So, there's a dude, there was 2 sons. There was Jacob. Everyone's shutting the show off now. They're like, I don't want to hear your stupid Bible stories. This one's funny. So, there's Jacob, and there's a dude named Esau. Might be saying that wrong, but just bear with me. So, God's like, listen, you're going to have twins, but they're going to be separated. One of them is going to be super strong and take command, and most likely, the older will serve the younger one. So, this woman gives birth, and trust me, this is Bigfoot related. This woman gives birth to Esau first, covered in hair. Absolutely covered in hair. And she's like, I will name you Esau, which means hairy. So she looks at the baby and goes, oh man, you're covered in hair. Your name is Harry. Next baby she gives birth to is named Jacob. So they're brothers, and this is like the start of the genealogy of, again, like the Israelites, right? So they said, Jake, one of them was going to help lead the people. And Esau was kind of like just hot-headed, couldn't think of anything. One day he's out, and they don't explain what happened, but he comes barreling into the house, and Jacob is eating some soup. Jacob's eating some lentil soup. Esau walks into the house half dead. No, like 75% dead, and he's like, I need your soup. Oh my God, if I don't eat right now, I'm going to fall over and die. What he was doing previous to walking into the house, nobody knows. But he walks into the house and he's like, give me some lentil soup. And Jacob goes, I will give you this soup if you give me your birthright. Because Esau was the oldest, he was supposed to be the one in charge. Jacob's sitting there with a bowl of hot lentil soup, and a man is starving to death, doing who knows what. Just 10 minutes previous, I will give you the soup if you give me leadership of the clan, basically. And Esau goes, at what point is leadership of a clan if I die of starvation right here? So Jacob gives him the soup and takes over. What was he playing, like Fortnite for like 10 days straight? How can you... There's multiple problems with that story, just like moral problems. One, your brother's starving to death, and you're like, I'm just eating soup in front of him and being like, if you give me that. Secondly, what were you doing that you were starving to death? You're like, what a bizarre way to jump into the middle of that story. It's not even that Esau, it says he came in from the open country. That's what we know. But was he just like out? I can imagine him with like sitting in the middle of nowhere with like a piece of wheat in his teeth like Huck Finn, and then going, oh my God, I'm going to starve to death. And he runs into the house and being like, please give me some soup. Because apparently they had soup. How far away? I don't know. So bizarre. Oh, and I want to say this too. There's a pushback also on Bigfoot being Cain, because a lot of Mormons for a long time, they don't think it so much, but for a long time, they believed that the mark of Cain was you were black. So when everyone was white in the Garden of Eden and Cain kills Abel, they're already kicked out of the Garden of Eden, but so when Cain kills Abel, God goes, anything you do with the ground will produce no harvest, and you will wander the earth forever and then he made him a black dude. That was a legitimate belief for a long, not legitimate like it makes sense, but there was a belief for a long time. It wasn't until 1979 that the president of the church had a vision, and he goes, you know what? God just told me black people can be members of our church. Now, it's interesting to know, there were, I guess, a few before that, but now they could like rise up in the church. It is interesting to note that after he had that vision, they began doing a lot more missionary work in Africa. So it could have been a financial decision, could have been a message from God. I don't know. But so that's been the pushback, because the Bigfoot that David W. Patton describes is both hairy and he was completely black. So you could take that as the skin being black or the hair being black. But yeah, there was a belief for a long time that black people were cursed by the mark of Cain, which makes it kind of complicated, because they said if you kill me, you'll suffer 7 times over, and I don't think there's been much retribution for killing black people. A little bit, but not a lot. Not 7 times worth. So, that is the convoluted story of Cain, Esau, Bigfoot. Oh, and I should say that, yeah, they thought Esau might be Bigfoot because he's covered in hair. But, again, it was weird. Like, people will, if you're religious, you will go to your religious text and say, can you help me explain this stuff? And sometimes it can help you explain, like, moral dilemmas you have. But it's not going to tell you whether or not Bigfoot is real. DeadRabbitRadio@gmail.com is going to be our email address. You can also hit us up at Facebook.com/DeadRabbitRadio. Twitter is @JasonOCarpenter. Dead Rabbit Radio is the daily paranormal conspiracy and true crime podcast. I have to go pee so bad. You don't have to listen to it every day, but I'm glad you listened to it today. I have to go. Have a great day, guys. I'll see you tomorrow. Okay, so we're back. I hope you guys enjoyed that episode. That episode, the title alone is actually a selling point for the podcast. I actually didn't know the episode was as old as it was. I think it's like episode 82. And I was I don't think the show really hit its stride until like episode 100. But this episode turned out really, really well. I actually, when I'm marketing the show, because I'll say paranormal, conspiracy, true crime, a lot of people think of conspiracies as 9/11 was an inside job, Illuminati, stuff like that, stuff they've heard 100 times before, and I stop them. I literally put my hands on their chest and I say, no! Mormon Bigfoot. What? It's one of those episodes that's so bizarre, and I'm glad that it is as good as it is, because older episodes, it sounds like I just woke up to record it. This episode is a little bit in between that Quaalude Jason and then this Jason that's a little more, knows how to podcast and is more experienced and knows how to keep the energy up. This episode's great. It's super dense, too. I don't know. Most episodes are 2 to 3 stories long. This one had 5 stories in about 30 minutes. There was 2 full stories and then 3 little nuggets. But let's go through this real quick. Mormon Bigfoot, there's really not a lot to say on that. That episode, I don't want to pat myself on the back all the time, but again, I think it's structured perfectly. That's not patting myself on the back, right? I'm an expert. The little song, that was a joke when I was recording, and then when I was editing, I go, let's see if we can find a little song. It took me an extra hour to find that song, because it has to be free use and all this stuff. But it's just small enough, just adds a little bit of detail. It's not overwriting. I love the story. I enjoy the way I presented it. I have a lot of fun listening to this episode. It is a selling point for the show. So Mormon Bigfoot, you'll always live long in my heart. The other story I covered, we're going to kind of go about this in a weird way. The Nazi one, I get a lot of requests. I wouldn't say a lot, but I do get quite a few requests to cover Nazi stuff. I don't, because I think it's too mainstream. Nazis building space weapons, living in Antarctica, on the moon, the Fourth Reich, all this stuff. There's been so many movies, comic books, you got Hellboy, you can hear the excitement in my voice as I'm talking about this subject. To me, it's so done. Movies and cartoons, I don't know if they've had cartoons like that, but you know what I mean, like it's just so overdone. Nazi conspiracies, they don't get my goat running. It's not something that I'm looking for. The reason why I covered this one was because I have always heard this story about the Nazis and the occult and they were building this spaceship, and maybe they flew to space and stuff like that. And I obviously was like, yeah, maybe some of it's true. I don't think they actually flew to Aldebaran or wherever they went, but, I've always heard that. But for whatever reason, I don't remember if this story is recommended. It's been a while since I've listened to this. I listened to it in preparation for this, but it's still been a while. For whatever reason, I was looking into this story, and I found out that it was based on a fictional novel, 10 years after the war. And that, what gave me the hook. I would not have covered it if it was just some people believe that Nazis built a spaceship and went to space, because there's movies based on that. That's super well known. That's not even a conspiracy theory at this point. It's a trope. But when I found out that there was a suggestion it was all fake, and that Hitler thought that the occult was a waste of time, I was like, those are interesting things. You did have people in the Nazi government who were into this, but Hitler was like, whatever, guys, whatever, just do what you guys do. Just don't bring me in on it. Don't play Charlie while I'm trying to give this speech. So I thought that was fascinating. Again, I can cover those mainstream conspiracy theories if I can find a different spin on them. I'll mention 9/11 and I'll mention Illuminati from time to time because they're so well known. But I've never done a full episode, I don't think, on either of those. I did an episode on Are the Illuminati the Good Guys? Because, see, that's a different twist to that conspiracy theory. I'm not going to sit down and talk to you about the 13 families and go through the bloodlines and stuff like that. It doesn't interest me. There's 100 books on that. If you want to research it, you can research it almost for free, really for free. And that's the same thing I look at Nazi conspiracies. One, I don't find them super intriguing to begin with. And two, they're everywhere. And you can find them anywhere. So if I can find an interesting spin on them, I'll cover it. But other than that, it's just pretty normal conspiracy theory stuff. It's funny because this episode, and this is going to be a long outro. This almost feels like it's going to be its own episode. I talk about 3 more subjects, so let me try to figure out the way I want to discuss them. One, let's talk about the solar observatory story, the Sunspot Solar Observatory. That is an episode, I covered that. That was a that was a popular conspiracy theory. The difference is that it was brand new. It was happening as I was recording the show. The Nazi stuff's the Nazi stuff. It's been around forever. The reason why I didn't cover the Wayfair conspiracy theory, see, Wayfair I probably would have covered if it was happening while I was recording. But since I'd already recorded 3 weeks of episodes and I was gone, and that story popped up, and then it became such big news, I was like, if they want to know about this, they can research it. You didn't even have to research it. It was all over the news. I thought about doing an episode just on how the media reaction to it made it even weirder. I don't know what to make of the Wayfair thing. I honestly don't know how to take that. But I think the media's reaction to it, it's so bizarre. The media will be like, this isn't true. This bizarre conspiracy theory isn't true, and they'll lay it out on their newspaper, and I'm reading it, and I'm thinking, now people do believe it. 100% believe it now. So it's bizarre. It's almost like the media is fueling the fire. I honestly probably could do an episode on Wayfair and see, that's the thing. I'd want to find a new angle to it. We've all heard about Wayfair. I'd have to kind of figure out where I'm at on it right now, because it is highly suspicious. It's super, super suspicious, okay? But I know a lot of it's been debunked, but it's still really, really suspicious. But I could do an episode on the media circus surrounding it. See, I always like to kind of bring in a new angle to it. But sorry, this is almost like its own episode, this outro. Sunspot Solar Observatory, we talked about it on this episode. I did its own episode on it. The FBI said that they arrested some guy because he had child porn and he was threatening people in the laboratory. Those were 2 people you don't want working for you, right? The child pornographer and the guy with the knife. It's a bad combination when they're both the same employee. The FBI swooped in, took them to this. This is a story that I'll pop in and out of every once in a while. To this day, they have not released the name of this guy. There's no arrest record as far as I could find. The story's done. So that is what makes this extremely suspicious. The reason why I haven't done a follow-up episode on it, because there was nothing to follow up. I might have mentioned it since, but there's been no... Why would they protect this guy's identity if he's such a sicko? So that was kind of the end of it. That was the official reason of why they shut down the Solar Observatory. We don't know anything more. And so it's funny when you listen to these old episodes where I'm like, hey, this is going on and stuff like that. I think probably the real explanation is somewhere in between the reality and what we think it is. Originally, people were thinking it was aliens, or not like aliens for downloading child porn, but they were like alien, like it detected some sort of alien anomaly, or they detected something with the sun. Remember that whole meme about observatories being shut down around the world? Remember all that stuff? And people were super panicked about it, and it turned out those observatories had been shut down for months for maintenance or something like that. I don't think it was this extreme alien thing, but I don't think it was just a creepy janitor. I think there's something else going on there. I don't know if it was compromised by nationals from another country, or someone was using it to do something more worse than... There's very few things that are worse than that, but I'm talking like nuclear launch codes or something like that. So I don't know. They've never revealed any information about this guy, which would make me think either that's not the real reason, or this guy is related to someone so powerful that it would get covered up. So we have the Sunspot Solar Observatory story, and so I think there probably is something more to that story. On the other hand, this is basically its own episode. I hope you guys are enjoying this. On the other hand, we covered the story about the YouTube shutdown. Remember that? Remember that, guys? And I remember YouTube was shut down for what, like 8? I ended up doing an episode on the YouTube shutdown. And I don't remember what I talked about, but I'm pretty sure I talked about what I'm about to talk about now. The YouTube was shut down. The YouTube, sound like grandpa. YouTube was shut down for, 8 hours a day or something? I bet you guys don't even remember. If you guys hadn't heard this episode just now, you'd be like, what? YouTube shut down? That's why I had to do this as an outro. YouTube was shut down for like 8 hours or 10 hours. The official reasoning was they were doing a Google Plus. They were getting rid of Google Plus or Google Communities or something like that, and it caused the outage. But what we heard was there was really an alien. Someone uploaded alien footage to YouTube, and they had to shut down the whole system to keep it from spreading. Remember that? Remember that 2 days when that's all the conspiracy community talked about? And then it kind of trailed off for a couple weeks. People may still bring it up now. That's what's so funny about conspiracy theories. The immediacy of them and how quickly they get brushed aside. How quickly you have to recalibrate or ignore that stuff. The same people who were telling you YouTube was shut down because an alien video was uploaded. And you notice it hasn't been uploaded to BitChute, hasn't been uploaded to LiveLeak, it hasn't been uploaded to Band or whatever websites we're going to talk about. Pornhub, I don't know what was in the video. Has never appeared again, but there's such an immediacy. The same people who are telling you this new conspiracy theory, the same people who are trying to get you super hyped and scared and hyperventilating and all this stuff, apparently they want you to go into shock. Think about that. The next time you're reading a conspiracy theory that's based around making you scared, remember that that person most likely also believed YouTube was shut down because of aliens. It just goes and goes and goes. Those are the same people who post... what was that one? Like June 6, 2006, the world was going to end. That was a big one. We get those all the time. The happenings. Whenever you're reading this stuff, and see, that's what happens when you get to be old, like myself. You've consumed this stuff for so long that you just go, that's fake. That's fake. I give most stories due diligence. Like the Nazi thing, I really did believe the Nazis were trying to build this spaceship. I'm sure I'll get bombarded with clips about building Die Glock and all that stuff, but this specific story about, what was her name, Marina? I don't even remember her name, but you've seen pictures of her, Sabrina the Teenage Witch. She's a Nazi collaborator, you didn't know that? Where was I going with this? So where was I going with this? Sabrina the Teenage Witch. So as an old person, you've seen so many dates and deadlines for people to die and the world to end and all this stuff and they're like, no, you got to look at the numerology and think about it. I mean, really, I want you to think about this. The next time someone's trying to convince you that something is going to happen, just know in your heart of hearts that person also tried to convince you that YouTube was taken down because a video of a reptilian was posted. And the second that proved not to be true, they completely stopped talking about it and moved on to something else. And then when that turned out to not to be true, they stopped talking about it and moved on to something else. I was in that cycle. Remember, I used to believe in far more of this stuff than I do now. I still believe in some of it, but I'd be like, oh no, I remember, this is going to sound stupid, but I remember people were saying that aliens were going to attack the 2012 Olympics. And I remember being slightly nervous. Like, I don't know. Maybe they know more than I do. Maybe this anonymous coward on Godlike Productions knows more than I do. But then that happens so many times. Eventually, you just go, well, that's ridiculous. And I'm going to wrap this up with this, because all that being said, I made a statement in this episode. Out of all the nonsense in this episode, the debunked Nazi spaceship one, the Mormon Bigfoot, YouTube reptilian, sunspot, which again is still a mystery. It's not been debunked at all. It's still a mystery. I made just a passing comment. I think it's maybe a 2-minute long segment where I said, I think that the caravan coming up during I think it was the summer of 2018 was a CIA operation. I think the optics work for Trump. I think that I said, I think this is going on, this political why now? Why is this going on now? It's a very short segment. Guess what? LA Times on October 2nd, 2020, just this month, ran an article about a new caravan leaving South America, coming up through Central America, coming up through Mexico to the U.S. border. This is the headline of their article. As another migrant caravan heads toward the United States, skeptics ask, why now? And the whole article is about, hey, remember when we had that migrant caravan back in 2018, right before the election, and people feel like that seemed to be giving good optics to Trump, how he was able to say, listen, this is why we need the wall, this is why you need to have the Senate, and da-da-da-da-da. And now it's happening again. There's a mass caravan coming out from South America 2 months before the 2020 election. And LA Times runs an article, and that's basically what the people are saying. They go, why now? Is someone organizing these people to do this before these major elections so it rattles voters in America? That's the difference between the sexy conspiracy theories that everyone wants to talk about, and they'll get 50,000 views on their videos when they want to talk about Pizzagate. They want to talk about Illuminati. They want to talk about satanic imagery and music videos and all that stuff. And old hats. People who've been doing this for 30 years. Stuff like that. I called it. I don't know if that's exactly what was going on, but back in 2018, this was the only podcast, definitely the only conspiracy theory podcast that was saying that, hey, why now? Like, why is this happening now? I find it kind of puzzling that this is going on. We're getting all of this footage and stuff like that. Why is this going on now? Everyone else wants to talk about reptilians. These are the conspiracy theories that are hidden in that sci-fi fantasy. Old conspiracy theorists learn to see the web that all the other weirdos do, right? But you got to see through it. Sure, I can see why people would think that reptilians are ruling the world, and I can see why you would think that these news anchors are twitching out because they don't have enough adrenochrome. I can see why those connections exist, but you got to look through that stuff to see stuff like this. It's not a super sexy conspiracy theory. It involves real people in misery trying to leave one part of the world for another part of the world. It involves politicians sitting around debating stuff. It involves voters trying to watch the news and figure out what to vote. It's not sexy. It involves real people. But this is real conspiracy theory stuff. And it's funny because I made that comment and it was kind of an offhand comment, but it was something that I really thought was true. And now we have mainstream media asking the same question. Why is this happening again? Those are the conspiracy theories that you learn about when you really delve into the topic. When you really get into it. I know it's not as interesting as the Nephilim, but if you really want to be a conspiracy theorist, I don't recommend it. There's not a lot of money in it, but if you enjoy conspiracy theory, if you enjoy examining conspiracy theory, this is the type of stuff you look for. And just over the ages, you go, oh, that's weird. I remember at the time in 2018, I go, this is weird. This is weird timing for this. There's always immigration into the United States. There's always people trying to get into the United States, but this is odd. Now it's happening again. So yeah, I have now ascended to the splinter of conspiracy theories. Everyone else is just a Ninja Turtle, which is still pretty dope. I'm not talking trash about my conspiracy podcast pals. They're all still pretty awesome. However, there does have to be a splinter among the Ninja Turtles, and being a Ninja Turtle is pretty dope. Again, I'm not trash talking them on that. They're Ninja Turtles. You're a Ninja Turtle as well. But if you want to ascend, if you want to be the splinter of conspiracy theories, just do this for 30 years. Read nonsense for 30 years, 1. 2, when you have to start building up an immunity to the BS and to the nonsense so you can recognize it and go, oh, that's the YouTube reptilian guy. Oh, that's that's probably the YouTube reptilian guy. You got to build that up. If I find a conspiracy theory that I don't believe in, I'll still research it. I'll look into it and then I'll go, no, that's nonsense. If I find a conspiracy theory I do believe in, I'll start researching it to how it could be wrong. Because you need to know all that stuff, and that really helps broaden it. And you just kind of, I recommend, you got to read a newspaper. Got to read the news every single day. Because again, you can watch the YouTube videos and all that stuff. You can listen to podcasts and all that stuff, and that's fun. But if you really want to be an independent researcher, conspiracy theorist, you have to consume media from all sorts of levels. Don't watch the 100th video about Katy Perry's a Satan worshiper. That's not broadening your conspiracy theory base. Read about the Black Panthers. Read about all the stuff we're afraid the government is going to do to citizens of the United States today. They did to the Black Panthers back in the 60s and 70s. Like gang stalking, putting them under surveillance, beating them up, getting them addicted to drugs, flooding all that stuff. Now it's fluoride in the water or vaccines, but all those conspiracies people worry about today, the government did to the Black Panthers in the 60s and 70s. So you have to go back to the stuff. It's not the most sexy conspiracy stuff. But if you want to be a splinter, that's my advice. If you want to be a conspiracy theory expert rather than a conspiracy theory tourist, that's my advice. This is its own episode. This actually, I think, might actually be longer than the episode itself. So I'm going to do my outro. deadrabbitradio@gmail.com is going to be your email address. You can also hit us up at facebook.com/deadrabbitradio. Twitter is @deadrabbitradio. Dead Rabbit Radio is the daily paranormal conspiracy and true crime podcast. You don't have to listen to it every day, but I'm glad you listened to it today. Have a great one, guys.